Welcome to this e-learning video where I will give a short introduction to the DISPLACE model. You will see how to use this spatial bioeconomic model to support economically viable and sustainable fisheries and an application to a potential fishery targeting mesopelagic species. This presentation is split into three different parts. I'll start with an introduction of the mesopelagic layer and the motivation for a potential fishery targeting species in this region, after which we'll dive into the methods. I'll show you the importance of bioeconomic models for fishery management strategy evaluation, the DISPLACE model, its structure, in and output parameters, and I will show you how we intend to apply this model to evaluate different management strategies of potential mesopelagic fisheries under biological uncertainty. This material is produced by the Horizon 2020 MEESO project, which stands for Ecologically and Economically Sustainable Mesopelagic Fisheries. MEESO will determine the potential of sustainably exploiting the mesopelagic biomass for products intended for the human food chain. It focuses on two key mesopelagic species in the North Atlantic region, the deep-sea pearlside and the glacier lanternfish. Now, part of the project aims at managing and assessing social, economic, and biological impacts and risks of this potential new fishery. And for this, we use, among others, the DISPLACE model. The mesopelagic layer, or the ocean twilight zone, is a layer of water that stretches around the globe and lies between approximately 200 and 1000 meters depth. This layer is inhabited by a diversity of species, ranging from crustaceans to cephalopods to, of course, fish. Now, mesopelagic biomass estimates are very high but also variable and range between 1 and 10 billion tons globally. The mesopelagic community provides important ecosystem services. Many species in this layer perform diel vertical migrations, where during the day individuals stay in deeper and darker waters to hide from visual predators, and then during the night they move to shallower water layers to feed. With those daily migrations, part of the mesopelagic community has an important role in the sequestration of carbon to the deep ocean. Further, mesopelagic fish form an important resource for other species, such as marine mammals and tuna, and more locally, in the North Atlantic, for commercially important species, such as blue whiting. Now today, there is interest to start exploiting species in this layer. Because as the human population grows, the demand for food, including marine products, also increases. The Food and Agricultural Organization of the United Nations reported that while 66% of the exploited fish and shellfish stocks are fished in a sustainable way, 34% of those stocks is still fished above biologically sustainable limits. Now, the sustainable exploitation of new marine resources, such as mesopelagic species, could partially relieve the fishing pressure on existing marine resources. The mesopelagic catches will be processed into fish meal and fish oil that, for example, could be used as feed in the increasing aquaculture industry. The two main species of interest for potential exploitation in the North Atlantic region are Maurolycus muelleri, or the Muller's pearlside, and Benthosema glaciale, or the glacier lanternfish. Those are the two most abundant species in the region and are interesting target species due to their high fat content. Maurolycus is a small and short-lived species. The maximum age of the fish is 3 years and it matures already after 1 year. Over its lifespan, it reaches a maximum size of 7 centimeters. The species is distributed globally, but mainly concentrated in the temperate waters of the Atlantic and the Pacific Ocean. Benthosema reaches a maximum age of 8 years and a maximum length of approximately 10 centimeters and matures only after 2 to 3 years. This species is concentrated mainly in the Atlantic Ocean. Fishing in the mesopelagic zone could have a variety of social, economic, and biological impacts. Those can be positive due to the increased food availability, or negative due to, for example, the ecological impacts and investment costs. To account for those impacts and develop suitable management strategies that take the different trade-offs into account, It is necessary to develop a framework to evaluate scenarios of management strategies for potential mesopelagic fisheries under different sources of uncertainty, for example, due to the variability and population dynamics of the species. In order to manage fisheries sustainably, well-planned approaches and management scenarios are necessary which consider socio-ecological costs and benefits of different management options, and that also minimize conflicts among different fishing practices. These management scenarios are assessed and evaluated in Management Strategy Evaluation, or MSE. Here, simulations are used to compare different management actions and scenarios. Bioeconomic models are especially useful for this, as they allow for the investigation of the interlinked effects between fish populations and fisheries. The full fisheries system and each step of the management process can be simulated, simultaneously with the feedback on the fish population model. The most optimal management strategy can be decided upon according to the output of economic and biological indicators. The DISPLACE model is such a bioeconomic model, and it is a spatial, individual vessel-based model where each vessel and its decision-making process is simulated in space and time. The underlying biological layer with species distributions is also spatially modeled according to a high time resolution. The model provides indicators at different aggregations, for example according to fishing nations, fleet segments, métiers or single vessels, but also according to harbor communities, fish stocks and even benthic communities. The DISPLACE model uses input parameters related to vessels and their economics and combines this with input on biological parameters and gear specifications to simulate the fishery. The process is modeled and shown on a graphical interface, which makes it easy to run different management scenarios and track the simulations over time. Those simulations then result in time series of biological indicators, such as recruitment, fishing mortality or spawning stock biomass, and economic indicators, such as the gross value added and fuel use. It is possible to project the real world in the future, and by making each run slightly different, it is also possible to estimate the uncertainty of those predictions. The model accounts for the footprints of the individual vessels. By simulating the individual vessels in space and time, as you can see for example on this animation here, it is possible to account for the large diversity in fishing vessels according to size, fuel use, selectivity, fishing gear, and their decisions of where and when to go fishing, when to move to a new fishing area, or when to return to port. This vessel layer is coupled dynamically to predictions of fish abundance for different fish populations, as well as the benthic community. This highly detailed local information is then summarized into larger scale overall statistics. This gives the opportunity to provide understandable statistics while still having the possibility to also look into small spatial detail and to estimate the uncertainties of the different output parameters. This figure shows the DISPLACE workflow. The raw input data related to, for example, logbooks of vessels or growth rates from fish populations are made accessible to DISPLACE according to different parametrization routines. The final DISPLACE input data can be read into the graphical user interface, behind which the core model does its simulations. It is also possible to use high-performance computing if necessary. The results are post-processed into different plots and tables and reported. First, I will show you the necessary input for starting a DISPLACE simulation. It is first, of course, important to define a geographical area where you want the model to operate. This is a grid of nodes between where the vessels move and decide to do an activity. Different resolutions are possible, and it is important to also include nodes where harbors are located. Then we need information regarding the individual vessels. This includes information regarding their specific fishing grounds and preferred harbors and métiers, for example. And we also need their official vessel register data. To model then the spatial catch rates and routes made by each vessel, we couple the data from their logbooks and sales slips to data from their vessel monitoring systems, or VMS data, which provide location and time. On the harbor side, we also need fish prices for the different species, if possible according to their commercial sorting groups. For the biological parametrization, we need for the different stocks the numbers and weights at size, their growth characteristics described by a growth transition matrix, natural mortality, and other food web interactions. Of course, we also need the spatial distributions of the stocks. Those stocks are depleted according to spatial catch rates, according to stock, vessel, and métier. Métier information is therefore also necessary, indicating the size-based selectivity of the different fishing gears. Also, other non-explicit vessel depletion of the stocks should be informed. Currently, we're working on expanding the population dynamics and different abundance layers for the two mesopelagic species under investigation. After all this information is provided, a simulation can be run using the graphical interface. This is a demo of the graphical interface where a simulation is replayed. You can include or exclude the graphical nodes, and you can click on the vessels to retrieve more specific information. It is also possible to select and show different output layers, and to track the process in the panel on the left bottom side according to populations, harbors, and nations. You can also, for example, select specific fish populations or even different size groups, as well as other indicators. Behind this graphical interface, there is the core model running, where the interaction between the vessels and fish populations is modeled. Specifically, the vessels are characterized by their size, fuel consumption, movement at sea, and their catch rates per stock. At each time step, for example per hour, and at each graphical node, the decision-making of a vessel follows a decision tree, according to different options such as fishing, resting at a port, or moving to or from fishing grounds. The vessels then deplete stocks at each time step according to the vessel-specific catch rates and selectivity of the gear used. Stocks are characterized by individual growth, which is updated monthly, monthly length-based mortality, possibly also according to trophic interactions, and yearly recruitment dependent on length-based maturity. The spatial distributions of the populations are based on survey data and can be either constant throughout the year or quarterly updated. Different management scenarios can be evaluated, for example by improving gear selectivity, reducing fishing effort, or investigate the effect of different fishing closures. The results from the model, or from the model where high performance computing was used, is post-processed and then reported. The output includes time series of different economic indicators by vessel, fishery or fleet, such as landings, catches, catch rates, discards, revenues, profits, and emissions. Time series of biological indicators are also produced, such as the fishing mortality, spawning stock and total stock biomass, and recruitment. The results of DISPLACE can be exported and reported in different formats. It is possible to use the graphical user interface, which is easy to parameterize and to run, and to compare and replay several simulations. Results are here stored in SQL databases. Output can also be reported in simple text files, after which you can use R post-processing routines to produce output figures and tables. It is also possible to use shell scripts and command line mode, for example when a large number of simulations or replicates is necessary and high-performance computing facilities are used. For the mesopelagic case study, we will parameterize the model to reflect the Danish large-scale pelagic fleet, selecting large Danish vessels that can move to offshore deep-sea activities. Further parameters related to a potential mesopelagic fishery related to costs and investments are based on interviews with industry representatives. Parametrization of Magolicus and Bentusema will be done based on survey information and estimated life history parameters and their uncertainties. We will evaluate different scenarios according to different population dynamic parameters, costs, and fish prices. We will also evaluate different catch allowances and gear selectivity improvements. The parametrization of the fishery will be based on this article, which was also published under the MEESO project. This is an in-depth analysis of the dynamics and the economics of the current large-scale pelagic fishery in Denmark, and also comprises the results of interviews with industry representatives to develop mesopelagic scenarios. The economic analysis were based on investigations of different break-even points for the Danish métiers and on analysis of profitable areas. The break-even point, indicated by the crossing of the cost and the revenue function, showing a zero profit trip, as can be seen on the figure here on the left, varies according to the landings and the fish prices, as indicated by the figure on the right. The entire area on the right of this right-hand curve indicates profitable trips, but not all scenarios here are realistic. Therefore, the profitable area is limited by the observed fish prices and by the maximum storage capacity on board. The cost functions depend on both fixed costs that do not vary according to year or effort, such as repair and maintenance cost, and variable costs, for example, for the payment of quota, energy consumption, and fuel use. These are two examples of the break-even points for herring and blue whiting. Herring, on the left, is a very profitable fishery, where the break-even point is already reached with relatively little effort. The blue whiting fishery, on the right, is a very costly fishery, but also with high possible revenues, as indicated by the light gray regression line. Interviews with Danish industry representatives indicated expected landing prices similar to summer herring of about 0.3 to 0.55 euros per kilo, expected catch amounts similar to the sand eel fishery, expected trip durations of about 2 to 5 days, and the fishing patterns and cost structure similar to the blue whiting fishery. This is a costly fishery as small meshed deep-sea trawls are required at large depths. Therefore, extensive engine power and high fuel consumption is required. Also, additional costs are expected, which will likely be high. This is, for example, related to investments in storage capacity and conservation methods, as well as gear adaptations. We build mesopelagic scenarios according to varying break-even point revenue functions, according to the smallest, intermediate, and largest revenue functions in the Danish fishery. Then we also varied the cost functions, and here we looked at the cost function of the current blue whiting fishery and a 50% and a 100% increase in both fixed and variable costs. The scenarios resulted in the following profitable areas. Here, horizontally, the revenue functions vary, and vertically, the cost functions. The profitable areas are limited by the expected fish prices and maximum expected catch per trip, according to the interviews. The upper right corners of the profitable areas indicate the maximum possible profit for each scenario, which ranges in this case between 1.2 and 1.5 million euros per trip. The parametrization of the mesopelagic populations will be done based on the results of another paper in submission as part of MEESO, where life history estimates were estimated for both species according to different regions, Norway, Iceland, and the Bay of Biscay. We used length frequency data from different surveys to estimate growth characteristics and mortality rates, as well as selectivity parameters, as different gear types and mesh sizes were used in the different sea regions. Parameters of the von Bertalanffy growth function were estimated with their uncertainties in all regions, and we subsequently also estimated the mortality rates and their uncertainties using these growth parameter distributions as input. In DISPLACE, those life history parameter distributions will be used to assess the effects of spatial differences in life history parameters. We will estimate the fish prices necessary to account for the costs and investments under those different scenarios, and we will investigate the effect of different management measures accordingly. The DISPLACE software can be downloaded for Windows, Mac, and Linux through the website displaceproject.org, where you can also find some datasets for illustration. Further information about the DISPLACE model, documentation, and tutorials on how to set up and run scenarios are also available on the DISPLACE website. There are also step-by-step tutorials and demos available through YouTube.